So these are going to be the revision questions on the Rainy River story with the answers. The questions are found at the end of each PowerPoint. I also have this handy worksheet that you can fill it in. And then these lines are where the answers are actually. So I'm going to go over this. We're going to check the text, show you what I read, show you sort of what it means. So the first question, Tim feels like he is naive to a lot of information about the Vietnam War, as well as to the world. What are some things that he names as examples that he does not understand? So if we go here, it's going to start on page or on line 22 through 40. So we're going to come here to this page. This is pretty much where it starts right here. And this is basically a bunch of information that he's talking about, and it's very confusing, and it's meant to be confusing because the whole Vietnam War was a very confusing time. So he's sort of throwing all this information and all of these names at you with the intent of confusing you because this is what was happening. This is what was actually happening. There were all these things being thrown at, all of the people, and no one really understood. It wasn't clear. No one understood why these things were happening. So it says in June of 1968, a month after graduating from Macalester College, I was drafted to fight a war I hated. I was 21, young, yes, and politically naive. Remember, naive means lacking worldly experience. So he didn't know better. But even so, the American war in Vietnam seemed to me very wrong. And then if you look here, the very facts were shrouded in uncertainty. Was it a civil war, a war of national or liberation or simple aggression? Who started it, and when and why? What really happened to the USS Maddox on that dark night in the Gulf of Tonkin? So look, this has a number one. Go down to here. Gulf of Tonkin, a reference to the alleged attack in 1964 on the U.S. destroyer Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of North Vietnam, which provided a basis for expanding U.S. involvement in the Vietnam conflict. So basically, this thing happened, and the U.S. used it as an excuse to say, okay, look, now we can go to war. Who was Ho Chi Minh? Let's check this. Ho Chi Minh, a political leader who waged a successful fight against French colonial rule and established a communist government in North Vietnam. So it was the start of communism in Vietnam. Was Ho Chi Minh a communist stooge or a nationalist savior, or both or neither? What about the Geneva Accords? Okay, the Geneva Accords, a 1954 peace agreement providing for the temporary division of Vietnam into North and South and calling for national elections. What about CEDAW and the Cold War? What about dominoes? So he's saying basically all this stuff. Like he's a young person, and this is all of the information, all of the stuff was being thrown at the American people, and it was being shrouded in uncertainty. Nobody knew if it was a conspiracy theory. Nobody knew if they were right or if they were wrong. The CEDAW is a Southeast Asian Treaty Organization. I think there's one in the Arab nations also. It's like they're treaty organizations. The Cold War was, after World War II, it was communism versus American capitalism. The domino effect refers to the domino theory, which holds, anyway. So basically, there's all these things happening saying that everything was super confusing. So I want you to just look there and try and figure out what are some of the things that he names that he does not understand. So some things that he basically is saying that he doesn't understand are political or philosophical reasons to go to war, who started the war, who's right, who's not right, are the communists really as bad as we think they are, who are these political organizations we're being told to follow. It's very confusing, and it's meant to be very confusing. That's kind of the whole point here. The next question, Tim gives multiple reasons why he feels like he should not go to war. What are some of the reasons that he goes through in his head? So lines 50, so we're starting here. The draft notice arrived on June 17th, 1968. It was a humid afternoon, I remember cloudy, and very quiet. And I'd just come in from a round of golf. My mother and father were having lunch out in the kitchen. I remember opening up the letter, scanning the first few lines, feeling the blood go thick behind my eyes. I remember a sound in my head. It wasn't thinking, it was just a silent howl. A million things all at once. I was too good for this war, too smart, too compassionate, to everything. It couldn't happen. I was above it. I had the world. Phi Beta Kappa, this is like a club that you would be in college. They're called a fraternity. Um, I had everything. I was above it. I graduated from this fraternity, and summa cum laude means you graduated with high honors from college. And I was the president of the student body with a full ride scholarship for grad studies at Harvard. This is a mistake, maybe. A foul up in the paperwork. I was no soldier. I hated Boy Scouts. I hated camping. I hated the dirt and tents and mosquitoes. So you can read this, and he comes up with all of these different things that go through his head as to why he doesn't want to go to war and why he should not go to war. It's just him, having like this mental breakdown. The next question, how does Tim feel about his job? Why did he spend a lot of time alone? So it's line 87. So let's start here. 78. Okay, so it starts here. I spent the summer of 1968 working in an armor meat packing plant in my hometown of Worthington, Minnesota. The plant specialized in pork products, and for 8 hours a day, I stood on a quarter-mile assembly line, more properly, a disassembly line, removing the blood clots from the necks of dead pigs. My job title, I believe, was declotter. After slaughter, he gets really graphic here. If you want to read it, you can. I'm not gonna. I know you guys probably don't want to read about this, so I'm not going to force you to read it. But it gets basically, he just talks about how gross and disgusting his job was. He had to remove the stuff with a water gun, and where is it? Let me skip around here. Okay. So he's talking about the water gun that he used to clean them. He had to wear goggles and a rubber apron, and even so, it was like standing under like a hot blood shower. And he would always smell like this. He would always smell bad. I couldn't wash it out, even after a hot bath. Scrubbing hard, the stink was always there. Among other things, I remember it was tough getting dates that summer. I felt isolated. I spent a lot of time alone, and there was also a draft notice tucked away in my wallet. So he talks about how he just felt alone and he didn't really have any friends or anyone to talk to. So he felt removed from everybody. The next question, what are some things that Tim feared more than the war? So we can go 129 to 104. I'm going to start here. Schizophrenia is a mental illness. It's like multiple personalities. It's a mental illness. So he says, these are some things he was, it was a kind of schizophrenia, a moral split. I couldn't make up my mind. I feared the war, yes, but I also feared exile. I was afraid of walking away from my own life, my friends and my family, my whole history, everything that mattered to me. I feared losing the respect of my parents. I feared the law. I feared ridicule and censure. Remember, this is one of our words, censure, harsh criticism. My hometown was a conservative little spot on the prairie, a place where tradition counted, and it was easy to imagine people sitting around a table at the old Gobbler Cafe on Main Street, coffee cups poised, the conversation slowly zeroing in on the young Tim O'Brien kid, how the damned sissy had taken off for Canada. So he's basically just going through, and this is what he thinks people are going to start talking to him, talking about him behind his back to his family if he runs away. And then he says, he basically feels that all of these people that he thinks are judging him are the people that really should be to blame. So Tim feared exile or somebody not being accepted. He felt pressure from the community around him. He was mad at the older generation of people from his town and the old way of thinking. He felt pressure from his parents and all of the townspeople that were in favor of the war and in favor of like tradition and carrying on the tradition. The people in his town would judge anybody that didn't go to war and label them as cowards. This is basically what he's going into here. The next part, what feeling did Tim get at work that made him decide to leave? So right here, the emotions went from outrage. I was bitter, sure, but it was so much more than that. The emotions went from outrage to terror to bewilderment, means confusion, to guilt to sorrow, and then back to outrage. I felt a sickness inside of me, a real disease. Most of this I've told before, or at least hinted at, but what I've never told is the full truth. How I cracked, how at work one morning, standing on the line, I felt something break open in my chest. I don't know what it was. I'll never know, but it was real. I know that much. It was a physical rupture, a cracking, leaking, popping feeling. I remember dropping my water gun quickly, almost without thought. I took off my apron and walked out of the plant. So he just says like something cracked, something woke up in him, and it wasn't just something in his mind, it was something that he physically felt. Like he physically felt it in his body. He was so stressed out about everything that he just dropped his stuff and left, walked out. The next part, from here, so he got in his car and he just drove north. That's what he says. I scribbled. I'm not sure how long I stood. Let's do he's looking at his house before he leaves. The room was full of bright sunshine. Everything sparkled. My house, I thought. My life. I'm not sure how long I stood there, but later I scribbled out a short note to my parents. What it said exactly, I don't recall now. Something vague. Taking off. Will call. Love, Tim. Like it. Imagine just you write 6 letters, 6 words to your parents, and then you just leave and disappear. Then he says, I drove north. So he starts heading north. Um, So how did Tim find the Tip Top Lodge? That's the name of it. And why did he stay there? Tim was driving around in his car aimlessly and scared, and he saw the lodge on the side of the road. He decided to stay there because of its location and distance from how far it was from Canada. So he basically just finds a spot and says, okay, whatever, this works, and just parks his car. How does Tim feel about Elroy Bairdall? How does he describe him? So he meets him right here. The man who opened the door that day is the hero of my life. How do I say this without sounding sappy? The man saved me. He offered exactly what I needed, without questions, without any words at all. He took me in. He was there at the critical time, a silent, watchful presence. 6 days later, when it ended, I was unable to find a proper way to thank him. And I never have. And so, if nothing else, this story represents a small gesture of gratitude 20 years overdue. Even after 2 decades, I can close my eyes and return to that porch at the Tip Top Lodge. I can see the old guy staring at me, an 81 years old, skinny and shrunken, mostly bald head. He wore a flannel shirt and brown work pants, so he looks like a farmer, basically. He carried a green apple and a small paring knife, so a small knife to eat with the apple, and he's just an old man with like old eyes. That's the first part of the